we talk a lot about those muscle imbalances, and especially glute strengthening and stuff like that. And I think sometimes what happens, what I see, a lot of people are sometimes too focused on wanting to strengthen a muscle like glutes, but they want to do it with a lot of weight, or they want to do like heavy weights for the glutes. And I mean, you can tell me what you think about it. I mean, from my understanding, from a neuromuscular control, you don't actually need a lot of weight, especially in the beginning. What you want to do instead is just get that muscle, mind-muscle connection to the glute by doing some simple rehab type of exercises. Like we recommend bridges, single leg bridges, stuff like that, before even going into something like a deadlift or a barbell squat. I think sometimes people just want to do heavy weights really quickly, or they think the heavy weight is the way to only strengthen the glutes or to do corrective exercises. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. You need to do activations first, especially if your glutes are really weak, any muscle really, so that you can develop that mind muscle connection, so that you can have control over that muscle via the nervous system to actually get it to turn on and contract and subsequently get stronger. So if you're dealing with serious glute weakness and poor activation, you have a poor mind muscle connection. Yeah. Doing like barbell hip thrusters with weights, that's too much load to start with. You don't really need any load. I work with my clients as well, Leon.
I think we frozen a little. Sorry, we just froze. Okay, now we're back. We're back. We just frozen.
Yeah, so when I work with my clients, Leon, we'll do glute activation for sometimes weeks before we progress into doing more, similar movements that involve hip extension with like a weight load, like barbell hip thrusters. We got to make sure that the mind muscle connection is there and people are actually able to squeeze and contract their glutes before we start loading up that movement with weights. Another thing that I really see quite commonly with regards to the glutes, and I don't really see a lot of people talking about this online, Leon, is something called synergistic dominance of the hamstrings. So the glutes, super important postural muscles that most people don't think about. They also stabilize the low back, the hips, and the knees. So pretty much all of us need to work on glute strength. And something that happens commonly, especially in endurance athletes, is the hamstring muscles become dominant over the glutes with regards to hip extension, which is when your leg is going back behind you, right? So anytime you're standing up out of a chair, you're extending your hip. When you come out of the bottom of a squat all the way up, you're extending your hip. When you're walking and your leg's going behind you, you're extending your hip. And the prime mover, the muscle that's supposed to be doing the majority of the work in all of these motions involving the hip, which are all the same, hip extension, is the gluteus maximus. The hamstrings are synergist muscles to the gluteus maximus with regards to hip extension, meaning that they're supposed to assist the hamstring or the glutes to extend the hip. They're not supposed to do all the work for the glutes. But that is oftentimes the case with people, especially people that have poor glute activation. Their hamstring, something's extending their hip all the time when they're walking around. And if it's not their glutes, it's their hamstrings. So the very muscles that are supposed to be synergizing with the glutes are overpowering the glutes. And this becomes a vicious cycle that just keeps compounding on itself and getting worse over time. Because like I said, you're making these, you're extending your hip every day, just during every day, movement, just walking around. And if it's the wrong muscles that are extending the hip, in this case, we're talking about the hamstrings, then they are being trained, they're being worked, and subsequently they're going to get stronger. The stronger they get, the more dominant over the glutes they become, and then the lazier the glutes get, and then the more the glutes will shrink and atrophy as they become more reliant on the hamstrings. And then as they become more reliant on the hamstrings, that gives the hamstrings even more reason to pick up, the slack and start working even harder. And this whole thing in this way just keeps getting worse and worse and worse, right? And eventually your low back, hips, and knees start to give you issues because your glutes have atrophied so much and now they can't stabilize those areas. So that's another reason why it's really important to work on that activation of the glutes. Because if you have really bad synergistic dominance of the hamstrings, and then somebody tells you, oh yeah, you have weak glutes, you need to go do barbell hip thrusters. And then you just get underneath that barbell and you start thrusting away and you're feeling your hamstrings work the whole time. You're again adding strength to dysfunction and making that issue worse, because effectively you're training the hamstrings. You're trying
Yeah.
to train the glutes, but you're training the hamstrings instead, right? And again, that comes down to you and your unique muscular balance. Other people that have good glute activation, they can do that same exercise with the same objective form that you're doing it. For them, it's going to strengthen their glutes. For you, it's going to strengthen your hamstrings, and in a roundabout way, contribute to weakness in the glutes via kind of the pathway that I just talked about here. So that's like another thing that I see all the time with people, especially endurance athletes, that's kind of keeping their glutes shut off.